Enjoy all your favorite sports like never before at BetMGM. Sign up using code CHAMPION and your first wager is risk-free up to $1,000. Visit BetMGM.com for terms and conditions. 21 years of age or older to wager. Virginia only. New customer offer. All promotions are subject to qualification and eligibility requirements. Rewards issued as non-withdrawable free bets or site credit. Free bets expire 7 days from issuance. Please gamble responsibly. Gambling problem? Call 1-888-532-3500.
All right, everyone. Welcome back to the Direct-to-Video Connoisseur. As always, it's Matt here, and I'm joined by a very special guest this week. I think this is your third appearance on the podcast. We have Will from Exploding Helicopter.
Hello, Matt. Yes, I think it's my third time here. Great to be back.
Excellent. Yeah, and because one of the things I realized when I was thinking about it, I was like, what were the other two movies you did? And in my head, when you did Red Scorpion for the first time that you were on here, and in my head, I thought I did that one on your podcast, and I forgot that, no, I did Codename Wild Geese for the first time I was on your podcast.
Yes, we were kind of crossing the streams when we did Red Scorpion, because that's obviously a film with a lot of helicopter action in, and an exploding helicopter, which is obviously my primary interest in film. So yeah, we were kind of crossing the streams on that one, because you're a big Dolph fan, I'm a big exploding helicopter fan. So yeah, we were mixing our interests together with that one.
Yes, yeah, and I guess also too, unexpectedly, I ended up getting out some ill feelings towards Emmett Walsh in that podcast. That I wasn't playing. It was sort of exercising some demons that I wasn't expecting to exercise on that podcast.
I don't know. For most people, he's a national treasure, but yeah, seems to occupy a different place in your psyche.
Yeah, at least in that movie. For some reason, I was saying I was on John Cross's After Movie Diner podcast, and we watched Critters, which there's a scene in that one where Emmett Walsh is thrown by one of the aliens through a plate window out onto like the ground in front of the house that he's in. And I was saying how that there was a little catharsis for me in seeing that, which I don't know. Yeah, there's no reason for me to not like Emmett Walsh. You're right. He is a national treasure. I think Roger Ebert had an Emmett Walsh. Was it Harry Dean Stanton rule? Is that what it was? That like there's no movie that could be made that has one of those two in it that can, you know, if a movie has one of those two in it, it can't be bad. And I think it wasn't until Wild Wild West with Will Smith came out that rule was ever broken for him.
Sounds like there's some other demons that you need to exercise as well there.
Exactly, for sure. Well, it is as we're talking here, we're 1 week into 2022 at this point, which that means we're here. This is the future. I believe George Jetson is born this year in 2022. And then as I was bringing up this subject to you, Will, you mentioned some movies that take place in 2022 that I had completely forgotten about. So yeah, I think the first one was No Escape with Ray Liotta.
Yes. Yeah, great sort of prisoners dumped on a remote island flick with as you mentioned, Ray Liotta, directed by Martin Campbell, did a couple of Bond movies, and yes, got a fantastic cast of character actors in that film, and yeah, set in the year 2022. One I desperately need to revisit actually, but there's some other interesting films set in the year 2022 as well. So I think the first Purge movie is meant to be set in this year, and Soylent Green as well, rather troublingly, as we look at our future, where we are looking at climate change and the kind of overheated world that we see in that film. Yeah, troublingly, Soylent Green is set in 2022. So hopefully that film doesn't turn out to be too prophetic.
Yeah, it's interesting when you think of all the movies, right, that have come out, that came out, that were set in 2022, and sort of what the messages were. Like, no no escape. I think in the mid 90s, the whole, there was a crime epidemic that we didn't necessarily realize was not as much of an epidemic as we thought, at least in the United States, where it was like, oh, crack and everybody's killing each other and all this stuff and so horrible. And there's this idea, I guess, that as the future went on, this crime was only going to get worse, and they had to come up with new ways of dealing with crime. And so I guess they felt like penal colonies, that was where we were headed eventually. And and then the Purge, I guess, is kind of a different mindset of it, that like
dealing with crime.
Right.
Again.
Yeah, you're just always going to have it. So just give everybody a night to just, be horrible. And so, yeah, kind of a shift in the mindset of crime over time. And then, yeah, Soylent Green, like you said, the funny thing is I completely forgot that one was set in 22. And when you go to the poster, the very first thing it says is in the year 2022.
Well, you can't remember all of these details, Matt, so I wouldn't beat yourself up too much about failing to remember that.
Yes. Yeah, and I think the one thing I think that I don't know about you, but I think the one thing we thought we were going to get by now would be flying cars. That was the one that, like, I remember in the 90s, or maybe even the late 80s, there was a battery commercial, and they were showing how if you put this battery in your garage door opener, that it would last for however many years. And what they did is the door would open and it would show a different year and it would be a different car. And so when it opened for the year 2000, a flying car came out. And my mom's like, I remember my mom saying, "Oh, look at that. Matthew, you're going to be 21 in the year 2000." And so, wow, yeah, that seems like this far away thing that I'm going to be 21, I'm going to be an adult and all of these things. And, now I'm 42. So it's like, one, we have no flying cars, and two, 21 seems like a long time ago.
Yeah, it certainly does. But I can't get too excited by the prospect. I mean, I don't even drive a car, so I can't get too excited by the prospect of flying cars. I wouldn't be allowed to get in one and drive one anyway.
Right. I don't drive either. My wife and I don't drive either, which I think it's rarer in the United States. It's not so rare for my wife because she grew up in the city of Philadelphia here. But for me, growing up in the state of Maine, where there really wasn't much public transportation, I had a lot of I kind of had a way of living in places where I didn't need one so much. But yeah, I don't have one either. I do have a theory for why we never got flying cars, though, and that's because the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, kind of one of the foremost technology institutes in the world. It's based in Massachusetts, based in Cambridge, Massachusetts, near Boston. And anybody who most people don't realize this, but Massachusetts probably has the worst drivers in the world. Thinking about MIT, Harvard's in Boston. I mean, there are a lot of really great educational institutions, but for whatever reason, like, for example, I think their driving schools don't teach drivers how to use their turn signals. There's it's a mess there. And my theory is that MIT discovered the technology for flying cars, and they buried it because they didn't want people in Massachusetts to have flying cars, because they knew the disaster that it would have brought on the world. So I think we may have dodged one there with the no flying cars.
Well, I will defer to your better judgment on this topic.
Absolutely. Well, why don't we'll kind of dig into our podcast episode here. And the interesting thing that the movie we're going to talk about here, No Retreat, No Surrender. So very much the opposite of Sir Falstaff's discretion is the better part of valor. There's no this is kind of the opposite of that phrase. But I believe this might be one of the first times I've talked about Jean-Claude Van Damme on this podcast. I know I did a kind of a solo one when I was coming back from hiatus, where I talked about the movie Blackwater that he did with Dolph. But I'm trying to think if I've ever done an actual podcast episode where it was like, Van Damme movie was the thing, and we had a guest on and we chatted about Van Damme. So this is some new territory perhaps on the podcast here.
Yeah, happy to dig the shovel into that territory with you.
Yeah, so I mean, what are your kind of overall thoughts on Van Damme as one of the premier action stars?
Yeah, well, I'm actually a big Van Damme star, and of those kind of that era of action actors like Dolph or Sylvester Stallone or Steven Seagal. I've actually seen more Jean-Claude Van Damme films than any of those other actors, and he's somebody who's actually really sort of grown in my affections over that time, because I think when I first started watching these sorts of films, back in the 80s and the 90s, I think I really felt that Van Damme was sort of in the second tier to behind people like Arnie and Sly. But over the years, I've really sort of grown a really warm affection towards Van Damme, and I think he in particular, it's I think the latter, how he's handled the sort of later part of his career, I think is really admirable. And on one of your recent shows, you were talking. About Bruce Willis, and and we all know the types of terrible films that he has just been, the kind of junk that he's just been pushing out into the world over the last, well, pretty much 10 years. Steven Seagal, he just, very visibly just doesn't care. Whereas Van Damme, actually, I think of all of the films, he's navigated this latter part of his career in a much more interesting way. And sure, some of the films that he makes, you might not like them, but there often very seems to be interesting things going on with them. So, things like We Die Young, which is a film that came out a couple of years ago. I didn't terribly like it, but it was a really interesting film, and you could see that why Van Damme had tried to do it, because it was a little bit different. He's trying to sort of, I don't know, flex some different muscles that he normally does in these types of action films. And he's actually somebody who has noticeably grown so much. I think of all of those actors that I sort of mentioned previously, I think Van Damme is the one who has most noticeably improved as an actor over that time. So I just kind of I really enjoy his films, but I also really respect how he has gone about his career over the decades.
Yeah, I agree with you on that, because I think the most interesting thing about him now, I think there's some movies like oh, now I'm drawing a blank on the name of the title. It's the one where he was had his kidney stolen, and
Pound of Flesh.
Pound of Flesh, yeah. Where in that one, I think he's playing somebody younger than himself. I think he's playing someone who's born in like the early 70s as opposed to somebody born in the early 60s. But for the most part, he doesn't do that, which I think is really good. In that, I mean, there's JCVD, of course. I think that's kind of the big one for him, where it's like he kind of comes to reckon with aging. And at that point, he's only, not even 50 at that point when he did JCVD. And I remember there's a scene in that where he says, I can't do these big one-shot scenes anymore. I'm almost 50 years old. And so he's, he was really kind of reckoning with who he was. And I don't know that any of the other stars that you mentioned could have done a JCVD the way he did it.
Yeah, I would agree with you. I think some of those other actors, unfortunately, I think their egos are frankly too big. I just think would be impossible for sort of Bruce Willis to show that level of self-awareness. And I think Sly has shown some, on occasions that he is willing to reckon with his advancing years, things like Copland. But but then he does something like that, and he takes a few sort of bits of criticism for it, and then he's back into he's back rebooting the Rambo franchise in differing shades of ridiculousness. That's a whole nother conversation in itself. But yeah, I think I don't quite know what it is about Van Damme's personality that allows him to sort of show that level of vulnerability, I guess it is, or to show his flaws. It's interesting that he alone amongst his peers has kind of been prepared to show that level of vulnerability.
Yeah, and it's interesting too, because the movie we're going to talk about, it's No Retreat, No Surrender. I mean, it's his first film, and one of the things I think one of the things that was really great is you pointed me out to an article that was that kind of did like an oral history of this film, and there was a sense from the people talking about it that he had a huge ego, that he was ready to kind of go. And I think for so many of these guys, it's like you have that huge ego, and then the idea of transitioning to something else, a different kind of movie, a different kind of starring film, it's a difficult thing. But for some reason for him, and I mean, I don't know, I'm trying to think if there are theories about it. I mean, one, I think that's interesting about him, thinking about JCVD, but then also another film that you'd mentioned before we did the podcast, The Bouncer. it almost maybe the fact that maybe because he's from Belgium, maybe there's a certain European sensibility towards aging that he has that maybe not all of the other actors have, because he's doing these movies that JCVD and the Bouncer are both European films that don't kind of have the same feel of what a normal action film would.
Oh yeah, completely. And we were sort of batting around, whereas we were sort of discussing doing this show together, we were batting around a couple of films, and The Bouncer was one that I put forward because it's a film that I'm really keen on, and yeah, it does have that sort of European flavor. I mean, it's a much more for people who haven't seen it, I'd really recommend it. It's a really good little like B movie. I think what makes it interesting, it's quite a character driven story, much more than you kind of get typically in, say, typically that you would get from a Van Damme film. And there's a really nice relationship within this film between Van Damme's character, who is this sort of aging former bodyguard who is sort of living a little bit under the radar because he did some sort of shady stuff in the past, and he's trying to sort of make sure that doesn't sort of come back to wash up on him. And there's a really nice relationship he has with his daughter. He's sort of single parent. It's just all sort of handled with simplicity and with some restraint, but it's also got some really great action in there. There's a fantastic long one-shot scene where Van Damme has to go and kidnap this drug dealer character within the film. And as we were talking about, again, this is a film where the passing of years is acknowledged within the film for Van Damme's character. There's this, in order to get this bouncer gig that he's working at this sort of very low rent strip club, the kind of the owner just sort of dumps all of the prospective candidates into the basement and just sort of says, okay, the last one of you standing, gets the job. And, we can see, within that fight, you can see, Van Damme's, he's kind of struggling to keep going, and he kind of gets down to the last two fighters, and they both have to sort of pause for it, give themselves 30 seconds before they then start taking each other on, because they're both like shattered. And it's a really good little film, and one that I would, again, sort of shows Van Damme's ability to kind of move with the times, but also to actually deliver a dramatic performance. And it's a very well shot film, and it just is a great little sort of B movie action flick.
Yeah, and I don't know in England if you have IMDb TV, but here in the States, it's available on a few different free streaming platforms here. IMDb TV, Tubi, Pluto. So yeah, I think for a lot of people out there, I think there are I think it's subtitled for a good portion of it. And I know that's something that people sometimes have trouble with, but I think it's for people that have trouble with that, but you're into action movies and you're into Van Damme movies, I think you should sort of lay that to the side, because it's worth it.
Yeah, and it's got that. It does have a downbeat ending, which kind of, I think you could say, fits more into sort of perhaps European tradition of filmmaking rather than a sort of more commercial Hollywood type of filmmaking. And I think some people may have a bit of a problem with that, but if you're open-minded enough to watch some subtitles, you're open-minded enough to watch a film where it doesn't all end perfectly for everyone, there isn't a nice sort of happy clappy ending, then it's a film that would really reward your time. It's sometimes known as Lucas, so if you're having trouble tracking it down as The Bouncer, you might just need to search for it as Lucas.
All right, excellent. Well, yeah, I think that's a really good. I think it's maybe a good way for us to segue into the film, the kind of the meat of the film that we're discussing here, No Retreat, No Surrender, which is, I mean, yes, if you go through his IMDb bio, it's not his first credit on there. I mean, we know like he was in Breakin'. I didn't realize he was also an uncredited soldier missing in action. Yeah, I guess
I don't know if that's a bit of dodgy IMDb.
Could be.
Yeah, I have seen that, but I've certainly not seen him in that film.
Yeah, it's interesting. Yeah, like you talk about that sort of the kind of the way IMDb sort of crowdsources. I think we discussed this before, that like Don the Dragon Wilson has a whole
Yes.
like bunch of films as just Don Wilson that we don't know how many of those he was actually in or not, because they kind of appear and disappear from his bio from time to time.
I don't know. I'm slightly frustrated on one level, but on another level, I'm quite pleased that sort of, that sort of 80s era of video films, made in the Philippines or Thailand or whatever. There are vagaries about even now today as to who exactly is in them and who isn't. So I kind of, one level I'm frustrated, and the other I like this air of mystery as to, was Don the Dragon Wilson really in The Last American Soldier or not? Who knows?
Right. It does. It adds a certain level of charm to these kinds of movies that I think we sometimes, like it kind of part of why we enjoy these kinds of movies. I think like it almost like it has to be this way for us to enjoy them.
Exactly, because they haven't been 4D, they haven't been given a 4D, 4K restoration or anything. So you're just sat there looking at the screen, a very fuzzy, grainy picture, that's jumping around because the tracking isn't quite perfect, trying to work out, oh, is that Don Wilson or not? Like in the background there.
Exactly. Yeah, I did that for what was it? Strike Commandos, I think is the movie that he was supposed to be. It's not the Reb Brown one, but it's like a different one. I think that was the one where I was like, is that him flying a helicopter? And I think that was also one of the ones that was like removed and brought back or something like that too. So yeah, it like you say, because it I think for you it affects how many films he's been in with an exploding helicopter, and I know for me it's because you review a movie because I wanted to review another Don the Dragon Wilson movie and add to his tag list up there, and then it's like, oh well, why else am I watching this movie if it's not, if it doesn't have Don the Dragon Wilson in it for a split second.
Exactly. These are, at the end of the day, these are really important sort of distinctions we're trying to sort of make here as to what films are in somebody's filmography and which ones aren't.
Exactly. Well, we know for a fact that Van Damme is in No Retreat, No Surrender, because for me, he kind of makes the movie. And I thought we'll kind of just dig in, and maybe we'll kind of go over some key points or some highlights. And like I was saying beforehand, Will, if as I go through things, if I skip something and you want to head back, of course, we definitely can. I think this is one I think you had mentioned. The film on Twitter recently, and it got a bit of a buzz, and I think this is kind of a favorite amongst our kind of B movie set it here on Twitter and wherever.
Yeah, it definitely seems to be one which has there's a real sort of like warmth towards it amongst the sort of action film community here, because I put out a message saying, oh yeah, now watching this film, and I got a lot of sort of responses and replies back to that, and for whatever reason I only actually saw this film for the first time last month. I don't know quite. I mean, you can't watch everything immediately, so it's just one that had kind of slipped through the cracks, and I was trying to fill in a few holes on Van Damme's CV. So I thought, right, I can see it's available to stream. Right, I'm gonna do this one, and I having watched it for the first time, I can completely see why this film is held in such popular affection by so many people. It is an incredibly likable film. It is a very endearing film, and I can see why today it still has for all its flaws, and I'm sure we're going to get into them, I can still see why it is such a popular fan favorite for so many people.
Yeah, and I think one of the things for me in watching this now, because I watched it last night, and actually I watched the Riff Tracks version of it that was on the IMDb show. So I got the guys who used to work on MST3K riffing the film and making jokes about certain aspects of it, which it's always interesting to see that version, because sometimes there are things in the movie that I don't even think about as being bad that they make fun of, and I'm like, yeah, that's right. Why did that happen? So it's very, kind of a very interesting way to look at it. But why don't we kind of dive in? So the film starts in Sherman Oaks, California, which I don't know if you've ever been to the LA area before.
I have not.
No. So I actually found out that I was looking up where Sherman Oaks is on the map. I had a rough idea of where it was, and I found out that I was near Sherman Oaks, which is it's part of LA. Near there is Studio City, which is where CBS has its lot. And my friend and I, when we went to Hollywood and LA in the early 2000s, we somebody on the street was handing out free tickets to be in the Craig Kilborn show. So it's a late night talk show after David Letterman, and so we were in Studio City, so we were right near where this film, the early part of this film takes place, and to some extent the whole film takes place there. It's just they don't tell us that. They tell us that we're in Seattle, but either way, and there we are in Sherman Oaks, and we're seeing a karate dojo. And interesting thing happens. A guy, an emissary from a organized crime boss, comes in saying, "We're going to take over your dojo because we want to use this as a front for laundering money," I guess is what the deal is. They want to use dojos across the country as fronts for laundering money. So we have our hero Kurt and his dad, who his dad is Timothy Baker, who I think we've seen in a few kind of karate films. The dad gets taken down a peg by Van Damme. Van Damme's one of the heavies of this emissary, and he beats up the dad and breaks his leg. And the dad decides at this point that discretion is the better part of valor. He does not follow the edict of no retreat, no surrender. We haven't been introduced to this concept of no retreat, no surrender yet. So in his mind, discretion is the better part of valor, and he moves his family to Seattle. But yeah, what did you think of this early part where we kind of get our first glimpse of Van Damme, but also this idea that a organized crime syndicate would do this?
Well, yes. I mean, it is quite a mind-boggling idea. I mean, you would have thought that organized crime would be, interested in using businesses where there'd be more, I don't know, more of a through flow of cash through, than some dojos where you kind of think, you can't be laundering too much money through those types of organizations. But I think that kind of idea it just sets up. I think it kind of orientates you as a viewer as to quite where this film is pitched, because that's a ridiculous idea, and we're going to be exposed to many further ridiculous ideas throughout the rest of this film. But yeah, it's kind of sets up a couple of important points in this film, because as you were mentioning, the dad has this notion that karate is for defense purposes only. It's not for aggression, and that's a theme that kind of follows through the film, although I think it's a bit fluffed, frankly, but there you go. But yeah, we get to see a couple of these kind of mobsters in here, and we start to see some of the things that crop up again and again in this film, where basically no characterization in this film is too crude. So the kind of the mobsters, one of the mobsters, the head mobster, and Van Damme both have these slicked back hair, which obviously in the 80s was an emblem of corporate evil. So yeah, we get our first sort of taste of a bit of martial arts action in this opening scene as well.
Yeah, and I think for me, the one thing that stands out in this scene is that Van Damme is kind of the larger than life figure. Like it's almost like a halo kind of is over his head when he's in the scene. Like it's really evident right there. I think obviously I saw this well after he'd become a star, but it's kind of evident when I'm watching this that like this guy is headed somewhere out of everybody in this film.
Yeah, I mean he certainly is that set up in that way. Not I mean he's got an on-screen credit at the start of the film, and Jean-Claude Van Damme. There's also the way he's dressed. He's wearing a sort of flamboyant white suit with a sort of red tie. So just he's visually made to stand out from apart from the other. I think there's three of these hoods that come into this dojo at the beginning of the film. So there's clearly and he's given the key, when when Jason's dad, fights back against the mobsters, it's then, and I think beats one of them, then falls to Van Damme to come in and settle matters, because he's positioned as the kind of the elite muscle within this mob organization. So yeah, I mean, I think there definitely is this idea being set up within the film, that Van Damme is not just as a character, he's not setting up him as a character, but also it's also they've clearly feel there's something about him, otherwise they wouldn't give a role like that to him. And at this point in his career, he'd done pretty much next to nothing, a couple of bit of extras work. So this is really the sort of his first part proper in any movie.
Yeah, and then of course buckle up. I would say buckle up, but I don't know what the expression is, but you be prepared because you're not going to see him again until the end. Like this, you get a taste of Van Damme here, and then that's it. There's no more Van Damme until the very end of the film. And I think that is one of the things for me that is really interesting. Like because this was supposed to be a response to Karate Kid from that the article that you sent me that Corey Yuen and company, they wanted to create a sort of a Chinese-based response to Karate Kid. And one of the things that made Karate Kid great was that you have this constant building of William Zabka and Martin Kove as baddies kind of throughout the film. And this is just sort of like, nope, they're gone. That's it. Again, the dad decides he's moving to Seattle, which we discover as they pack up the car and they drive off in their wood-paneled Ford LTD wagon. And when they drive off, that Seattle looks suspiciously like Sherman Oaks still. It's told to us that this is Seattle, but excuse me, it looks a lot like Sherman Oaks, which was interesting. I don't know if that's something if you've never been to these areas, if you pick that up right away, did it seem like, okay, this is not what I would expect Seattle to be?
I have to say I didn't pick that up. I don't. My eye is not as attuned to the kind of sort of regional variations that you sort of get in that I might sort of, if I was watching something British, I might pick up when I'm watching films here. But yeah, that's not a particular aspect I picked up on. But interesting to know they were cheating the viewer there.
Yeah, it's an interesting thing, right? Because when you write like you write a novel or a play or anything like that, it's like you can set the film wherever you want, and you don't really need to be there, and you can just sort of guess on particulars, and even not even have to get everything right. But when you make a movie, it's like, okay, I think they did do some shooting in Seattle, mostly to get the tombstone of Bruce Lee. But yeah, for the most part, the film was shot there, and there's certain scenes like there's one where the overweight bully guy is chasing the friend RJ, and you can see like the street sign that tells you what street you're on is definitely in LA. The way that sign looks is definitely something like my wife likes a lot of old detective films from like the 70s. And a lot of those take place in LA, and so it's the exact, like the areas and everything look just like what you'd see in those movies or those TV shows.
Yeah, there's actually something you mentioned that I wanted to just I thought might be useful to just sort of pick up on, because you spoke about the production of this movie and the fact that the producers of it, a guy called Ning Si-yun and Corey Yuen, who direct it, wanted to make a Chinese response to the Karate Kid, and actually one of the reasons why they wanted to make that response was partly because the Karate Kid had been so successful, and they didn't think that the martial arts action in it was terribly impressive, but also the fact that they saw how successful it was, but the fact that they felt that it was actually ripping off a film that they had made some years earlier, a kind of Jackie Chan film called Snake in the Eagle's Shadow. So they felt that the Karate Kid had kind of lifted a lot of story elements from there. They were unimpressed with the kind of the martial arts action in it. As we know, Ralph Macchio, not a martial artist. Even now, that's apparent in the Cobra Kai reboot series. And so they thought, well, we can do better than that. And I think in terms of a lot of the stuff that we're going to be sort of like probably picking out and highlighting, I think we need to sort of remember that this is the first English language film that Ning Si-yun and Corey Yuen had made. Corey Yuen, the director, didn't speak English, so he had to work with a translator throughout the entire film in order to communicate with like the cast and with like members of the crew. The guy who wrote the script for this film, Keith Strandberg, it was the first script that he ever wrote. The only reason he kind of was doing this gig was because he was fluent in Mandarin and knew karate, and he says himself, I didn't know what I was doing in terms of writing a script. The casting director for this film, again, he knew martial arts, but he himself admits, I knew nothing about how to cast a film. So I think you have within, I mean, as I say, I think it's a miracle this film is as entertaining and works as well as it does. But I think what you get here is you get a lot of people, and I think the same is for the actors. Many of the actors here had never acted before. They knew martial arts, but they never, and many of them never acted afterwards. So you just basically have a lot of amateurs, frankly, involved in this film, working with a director who doesn't speak the language that everyone else is speaking, and so you can just see. I think the impact of that in a lot of the way that this film pans out. You were talking about the fact that Van Damme disappears out of the film into the end. I think that's probably down to the fact that, as I say, Keith Strandberg never written a script before, so kind of doesn't really know how to sort of marshal the material. The fact that there are so many dodgy actors in this film, well, the casting director didn't know what he was doing, and the director didn't speak English. So that's not the best recipe for making casting decisions. And I think I thought it just useful to kind of flag up some of those details, because I think I think those issues filter throughout the entire film and influence it quite heavily.
Yeah, and it's actually, you mentioned Strandberg. I think in that article that you sent me, he says that his initial draft of the screenplay was like 180 to 200 pages long, which is which somebody was like, no, you can't make a script that long. And so of course that makes me shudder. Me, as the person who doesn't like a film over 88 minutes, like the moment I saw those words 180 to 200 pages, there was a kind of a shudder that went through me, where I was just like, oh boy. So thank you, somebody, for telling him not to do that. But yeah, so that gives you a sense of what we were working with here. And that probably also explains too why there's some other uneven pieces in this film. That if he had a 200-word or 200-page script, and people were cutting things out of it, they were probably trying to keep things as well that they felt were necessary, and they probably weren't as well developed.
Yeah, definitely, and I think there's lots of evidence of that throughout this film. There's a whole relationship with a character called Kelly that the character, sort of our main character Jason has, where it's blatantly clear, sort of things that develop their relationship have just been chopped completely out of the film, because sort of dialogue just doesn't make any sense. So yeah, they're clearly, whether they were filmed and then edited out, or whether they were just pages of the script that just got junked and nobody kind of smoothed out the kind of the rough spots that had then been created. I don't know, but yeah, there's lots of evidence of kind of, I don't know, this not being perhaps the kind of a film where the kind of the script had been finally honed in advance of production starting.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and so yeah, well, we kind of see some of these interesting pieces here. I mean, one of the things too, I think about talking about Keith Strandberg as someone who is kind of new to writing. We have the character of RJ, who is when Jason moves in, when his family moves into to quote unquote Seattle. And as he's moving in, RJ, a kid from up the street, visits Jason, and they get to know each other, become friends. And RJ stands for, I think it's something Jefferson. I can't remember. It was like Reginald Jefferson, something like that.
Yeah, makes a joke about it, doesn't he, in the film? But I can't remember what his proper name is.
Yeah, and it was kind of a tradition that if you have black characters in films, that they would be named after presidents in like the 70s and 80s. For whatever reason, it just seemed like that was what they always did. So again, I think that's this Strandberg guy, like, oh, okay, we've got our black character in the film, let's name him Jefferson something, or Roosevelt something, or and so like you see those kinds of things. But in talking to RJ, Jason discovers that RJ knows where Bruce Lee's tomb is, where he's been buried, because Jason, being a martial artist, is a huge Bruce Lee fan, and so they go and visit the tomb.
They do, and that sort of sets up kind of some stuff that happens later in the film with who we discover is who turns out to be Jason's sensei, the kind of Mr. Miyagi figure for him in this particular film. But yeah, I mean, and I think here with this sort of tomb, this scene at the graveside of Bruce Lee, we it's kind of, we start getting evidence of something that crops up again and again in this film, which is the tonality of it. I mean, it's all over the place. So these kind of opening scenes, we've had this sort of dojo scene, fight scenes a bit ridiculous. We've then had the family move to Seattle. We're introduced to RJ, who is this like absurd, over the top character in this film, and then suddenly we're at Bruce Lee's graveside for actually what's quite a poignant and touching scene. And yeah, there doesn't seem to be, there's no the scenes don't marry together in any kind of tonal way, and that sort of undulating, jackknifing type of approach to tone just carries on throughout the films. You are in these sort of early sort of 10 minutes, you are really sort of sitting back and going, oh, what am I watching here? Because at first I thought this was goofy. Now something, this is actually, they're actually trying to be quite sincere here.
Right. Yeah, you don't really know what's happening, and at the same time, we've kind of introduced this overweight fellow who I guess is a bully of some sort, and he's been bullying RJ. He doesn't really know. We don't really know what the issue is between him and RJ, and that's fine. Sometimes bullies have issues, but we get a chase scene where the bully chases RJ and RJ escapes, and then for some reason, this bully, this big guy, he's taking all his friends out to eat at this hamburger place. And this is the second time we've established with this big guy that he doesn't know how to sort of navigate food going into his mouth properly. He just gets it. And it's not like somebody because I think the idea of a heavy person is that they're so voracious that they eat and they don't really care that they're getting all over him. But it seems like in his case that, because earlier he's eating a chocolate cake and he's getting it all over his face. It seems like he just can't seem to get the food into his mouth properly.
Yes, and in that way, it does make you wonder, how has he managed to become so overweight if he finds it so difficult to consume food? So, it's another mystery that the film never fully resolves.
Yes. And then for some reason, RJ is just wandering through the parking lot of this fast food place. Again, no real apparent reason for him being there, but he just sort of wanders through. And of course, this guy's like, hey, this is the guy that I've had problems with. And everybody's like, well, why do you have a problem with him? Let's just say I do, I guess is what he's saying. They just kind of believe, they take his word for it, which is kind of also a theme through this, that people just take this guy's word for things, even though he seems like a shifty character. So they go I was just going to say the aspect about that character that I find quite perplexing is the idea that he seems to be sort of leading, certainly in that burger restaurant scene, he's leading this sort of gang of other sort of youths, but there's nothing about the character of Scott that gives you the idea that he would have the charisma or whatever magic ingredient he needs to actually be in that position within that group. I mean, if anything, he looks like somebody who would be bullied himself, and he'd be looking to RJ and Jason to kind of step in and help him out. Yeah, I mean, I get maybe because he bought them lunch. I guess maybe they feel indebted to him for the hamburgers. But even then, it's they aren't listen, we don't want to get involved with this. And he's like, hey, I bought you guys lunch. You could do me this one favor or something like that. No, they're just all in on this whole bullying thing. And so they go to confront RJ. Right? I don't know if and a little bit of a tussle ensues. And then Jason shows up because for whatever reason, Jason also just happens to be wandering by this fast food parking lot, and he confronts them. He takes down Scott. He kind of beats him up, and before that things can go much further, the proprietor of the hamburger place finally gets his act together and tells all the kids to get out of here. And so then the two of them are watching a karate tournament on TV, really nice old UHF tube TV, where they're watching this karate tournament that's taking place in Reno, and they see this guy win the match, and he's kind of we kind of have him set up as a big deal amongst everyone here. His name is Ron. His real name is Ron Ponell, but the character is Ian Riley, and so Jason decides to join his dojo, unbeknownst to him that Scott, the overweight guy, is also doing karate at this dojo, and he lies to the guy who's sort of Dale Jacoby, actor we've seen some PM Entertainment films. He is the one running the dojo while Ian is out doing his karate tournaments, and Scott tells Dale or Dean that this cat here, he thinks L.A. is much better than Seattle, L.A. Karate dojos, and they end up kind of, he has one of his best fighters in the dojo take down Jason, and they have to escape quickly. But that's kind of the idea, is that this Scott guy is also in really good with the dojo, which we weren't expecting.
Yes, and I mean that makes no sense at all. That Scott is a member of this dojo, because certainly in these tussles that we've seen him be involved in earlier, he hasn't shown anything that you would call martial arts prowess in those particular moments. And again, there's another sort of puzzling moment here, or that becomes puzzling later, because it turns out that Ian Riley, who works out of this, who kind of is involved with this dojo, his sister Kelly is a Sherman Oaks friend of Jason, but somehow Jason doesn't know that. So you'd think that, then Jason would know that, Kelly's brother's a martial artist and is involved with that dojo, but because of the previous relationship, there's no, he doesn't seem to be aware of that at all. Also, certainly the person writing through the script doesn't, Keith Strandberg doesn't seem to have kind of necessarily joined all the dots that he himself has put down on the page here. So yeah, this whole scene, in retrospect, when you get to the end of the film, becomes very, very puzzling and baffling.
Right. We don't know. Yeah, right. These people should know each other, because the next scene is a party where Kelly's birthday party is happening in a very nice place in the Sherman Oaks / Seattle area, Jason goes to the party. He's got a gift for Kelly. And Dale is there. Dale Jacoby is there. I keep calling him Dale. His character name is Dean, but I just think of him. I'm trying to think. I know he did the Ring of Fire movies. I was trying to think of what else he's done with PM. But he did. He hasn't, like you said, like most people in this film, he doesn't have a huge CV. But people who haven't seen this film would probably recognize Dale Jacoby. We find out that Dale has a thing for Kelly, and then Jason shows up at the party, and Kelly meets him, and he gives her his gift, which is a small bunny rabbit, which I think is kind of a big deal to be giving somebody that. But we find out that no, Kelly wanted this bunny rabbit, that they would bet at the mall in a scene that we never got to see, but they had bet at the mall together, and he went to one of those 80s puppy mill pet stores that they would have in the mall, and picked out a bunny rabbit for her. And they kiss, and Dale Jacoby sees the kiss. He's not very happy about that. And then Dale and Scott decide to bully Jason at the party, and also kicking him over a huge spread of Diet Pepsi and cakes and things like that. And his shirt's all torn and all of these things, and he decides to leave in a huff. So again, I don't know. This is just the discretion is the better part of valor here versus no retreat, no surrender. But he's definitely retreating and surrendering. He realizes he's been beat. And Kelly meets him at the car and says, listen, I had nothing to do with this. I didn't set you up to do this. And hey, I really still like you and all of that. And instead of Jason being like, okay, I'm glad you still like me, he kind of shoves her away and drives off to the tomb of Bruce Lee.
Yeah, looking for a bit more guidance. I mean, I think the thing that sort of by this point in the film, I was beginning to think that Scott, who's played by Kent Lipham, may well be one of the greatest characters in film screen history. I mean, he's such a ridiculous sort of caricature here. I mean, he's such a sort of sniveling sort of snake in the grass, and as we see in this scene here, he's a massive telltale tit. And then in the fight scene that ensues here, I love, even though Scott goes to this dojo, your Jacoby fellow is a kind of martial artist. Scott, they hatch this forgot a Jacoby character Jacoby fellow confronts Jason, and Scott's kind of snuck up on the ground behind him and is just kneeling down on all fours, so that as sort of Jason walks backwards, he falls over him in that sort of classic sort of playground thing that you used to do when you were like 7 or 8 to your sort of mates in the school playground. But you just think, well, these are grown adults and they're all meant to know martial arts. Why would they be doing like this sort of juvenile trick like this?
Yeah, it's almost like they felt like they needed to incorporate those Karate Kid bullying moments in, and they just didn't know how to do it. Like, so I have a hunch that the movie that Karate Kid, ripped off didn't have those kinds of moments in it, and I think they felt like, well, we've got to have this party scene. We've got to have, these guys bullying him to give him the impetus to want to train to be better. And they just didn't know how to do it, because you're right. It's like they're throwing cake at him. They're spilling their drinks on him, and it's and then of course like it escalates very quickly too, because when Jason goes to fight back, Dale is kind of with the upturned table that he'd been knocked over into, then Dale has his throat on the upturned legs of this folding table, and he's crushing his throat on this thing, and it's
choking him out.
Right, exactly. So it's it escalates very quickly into something very serious. So yeah, I think again, in context, like you said, of people who are kind of making a movie that they've never made before, they were trying to make a Karate Kid scene, and I think that's one area where I know, like you mentioned about how Ralph Macchio was not much of a martial artist, but he definitely played a victim as a bully really good in a movie, and I think William Zabka was the kind of the pinnacle of 80s bully. And so I think it would have been hard to make that work anyway, but then with what we had involved, it just, it didn't play out well.
Yeah, it's just goes back to that point of just this sort of idea of just weird decisions being made time and time again in this film. But that's kind of the charm, though.
Yeah. Yes. Now, I think this is where the film kind of this is where our big plot point happens, where kind of the thing that the film is most famous for, other than being Jean-Claude Van Damme's introduction. Jason goes to the tomb of Bruce Lee. He begs for help. He says, "Sensei Lee, you have to help me," which doesn't make any sense because Bruce Lee is dead. So why would he have to do anything? And of course, my 6th grade teacher actually said the only thing you have to do in life is die. So that's the only thing Bruce Lee has done. The only thing he has to do in life, which is die. But he really, he should be under no obligation, but the kid insists, "You have to help me." And then he goes home, and his father, who again is the discretion is the better part of valor guy in this film, freaks out seeing his son having, the result of having been bullied. His shirt is all torn. He's got cake all over his shirt. He's got bruises. And instead of being like, "Hey, son, are you okay?" Or, "Hey, do we need to take you to a hospital? Do you need to be checked out? Do you have a concussion, broken bones, or any of those kinds of things? You need stitches." His first thought is, "You've been fighting again, and I told you I don't want you fighting." And this escalates very quickly into this huge fight where the dad goes into the garage where he has his training set up and starts tearing things apart. We in America here, we talk a lot about Gen X, or Gen Xers and their boomer or silent generation dads, and how parents were not, those dads were not the most sympathetic figures. But this was kind of an extreme version of that I'm seeing here.
Yeah, I mean, it's the sort of the motivation doesn't really make sense for his character at this moment, and with this particular character, Jason's dad, again, throughout the film, you think in the hands of a more experienced scriptwriter, some of these sort of bumpy moments would have been ironed out better, because there are some. There's a kind of scene that we get to later where Jason's dad is working in a bar and he gets into some trouble with some of the customers, and he has to get into a fight with them in the parking lot, and Jason ultimately comes around and sort of helps him, and basically takes over the fight and defeats the people for him. But I don't know, in some ways for me, that scene should have been about Jason's dad kind of getting his fighting mojo back, and it should have been about him fighting alongside his son and kind of rediscovering his sort of fighting mojo. But that's not how that that's not how that scene sort of plays out. And there's this other idea again, which sort of crops up later, that in order for Jason to become the fighter that he needs to be, he needs to empty his mind of everything that he has been taught already about karate. Now, what he's been taught about karate is by his father, which is like, I mean, that's quite a big conflict there potentially, of like, you want me to abandon everything my dad taught me, but the film doesn't like embrace or acknowledge that, or do anything with it. So I think there's the whole sort of father son angle within this film. You can kind of see what they're going for, but as I say, it feels very much like a sophomore draft of a script here, whereas you're kind of like if you're at film school, your tutor would be going, okay, would be getting the red pen out and going, look, kind of need to, this doesn't, these plot points don't make sense. You need to, if you're going to have an arc, it needs to be a bit more like this. And I think this scene that you're talking about here, very much evidence of some of these arcs not really being properly thought throughout within this film.
Yeah, and I think the film almost takes almost like a Hamlet turn to it, right? Where here is it's almost like, because what happens is, we'll kind of go into what exactly happens here. Jason goes to his friend RJ, and RJ, of course, Mr. Man About Seattle / Sherman Oaks. He knows everything about the town, and he happens to know of an abandoned house that Jason can take all of his training supplies to, and turn that into his training location. Which, one thing that was really great, I thought, that was really convenient for them, is that these two teenage, seniors in high school had access to tons of candles in the mid '80s, and so they were able to light this place up with candles and get everything set. And then, Jason falls asleep at this new training facility he's created out of an abandoned house, and who should show up but the ghost of Bruce Lee. And the ghost of Bruce Lee has come to train him. This is where I think we almost get like a Hamlet kind of idea, only there's not a mother involved, right? It's more, I guess, like the martial arts is the mother, perhaps. I don't know. But the idea, right, is that like maybe that his real dad isn't really his dad, right? Like it's almost like a stepdad or some kind of a false father figure, the way that Hamlet's uncle is like a false father figure. But here the real dad comes in ghost form to tell him, like, right, like, empty your mind, right? What your dad taught you is no good. You've got to, do this. Again, I'm stretching here probably quite a bit for this, but it was just sort of the
certainly are with the Hamlet comparison. Right, but yes, I think you run with it, Matt. You run with it.
Yes. Well, just this idea that it's almost like his real father is the one who's showing him how to do martial arts. That, like, that this is at least his real martial arts father. That his dad might be his dad, but here's the person training him. But that's what we get. We get a series of training montages where the ghost of Bruce Lee, for the most part, early on, he's smacking Jason upside the head mostly. But eventually, there's actual training that happens here, combined with a lot of playground working out. Yeah.
Yes,
and I know. Go ahead.
I was a big fan of the playground training montages, but I mean, we do get some I think the training montages that take place in the house, or some of in the abandoned building, some of those training montages, some of the training moves looked to me quite dangerous, because there's this one where he's got his leg like winched up very high, kind of inside some sort of noose, and then he's having to sort of jump up and kick this bag with his other foot, and he tries and fails and falls to the floor, but his one of his legs is as I say, is winched up and stuck inside this noose. And I mean, I'm surprised he didn't possibly, I was looking at him wincing and thinking, God, you could really do yourself an injury if you don't sort of land on your ass here in quite the right way. But the playground training montages are absolutely fantastic, and I think come back to something which we know that this was a fairly sort of low budget production, from some of the stuff that we've been reading about this film. We know that a lot of the filming they did was on locations that were stolen, and you do get the sense of this was just like a playground nobody was using in the local area, and they just kind of, right, let's get as much of this, let's shoot as much stuff before anybody kicks us out of this children's playground. And they're just making stuff up on the fly, because there's very peculiar moves that are being done here in this training montage. There's one where where Jason's got his legs on a fence, and then his neck on a bench, and then he's doing this sort of peculiar sort of like letting his hips sink and then thrusting them back up. I mean, I don't quite know what muscle group he's meant to be working there. And as a later montage, we then have RJ sitting on his lap whilst he does these thrusting moves, which if you want to put a homoerotic read on them, it's you're not stretching too much to put such a one on there. But there's all manner of peculiarities going on in the kind of playground training montage.
Yeah, and actually, to your point about them possibly stealing footage from there, there is one of the scenes where he's doing these sort of like one-handed push-ups on the picnic table, where you can see kids swinging in the background. And so, yeah, I didn't even consider that, because one of the thoughts I had, of course, is in our current pandemic environment, the playground is actually the perfect place to get your workout, because it's outdoors. The gym itself is very indoors. It's there's a lot of not a lot of air circulating in there, whereas a picnic table in a park is a perfect place to get a workout in. So I thought it was worked there. But yeah, it's interesting, and there's a good amount of these training montages. There's between the playground and the house, and there's almost a sense, which I didn't realize, that I didn't know he was actually going home at any point. I was under the impression that he was living there in this place, but no, he actually is going home, and that's where we kind of discover that the training has paid off. But I guess maybe we'll get to where Bruce Lee finally leaves, right? And that's when the winched leg, where he has to like kick a bag above his head while the other leg is winched in. He finally completes it, and the ghost of Bruce Lee just disappears. That's it. He's done.
His work is complete. Yes, it's a strange, having sort of introduced the ghost of Bruce Lee. I mean, an absolute icon of cinema into your film. It's strange to sort of have him bow out in that particular way. I mean, one thing, one detail that I sort of picked up on, which I don't know if you were aware of, Matt, was that actually the guy who's playing the ghost of Bruce Lee actually doubled for Bruce Lee in Game of Death.
I didn't know that.
So he is kind of apparently he's Korean. So this then apparently this also compounded the language issues on set, because he didn't speak any English. Other people spoke Mandarin, so they had to then find somebody who presumably was then Corey Yuen would be speaking in Mandarin to somebody who could then translate what he said into English, which could then be translated into Korean for the poor old actor playing Bruce Lee. So I mean, just you can, as I say, it's a miracle this film came together as well as it did.
Yes, and one of the interesting takes that the Riff Tracks guys had on this was that they made it sound like that he was just like some bum, like grifter, who was pretending to be Bruce Lee and conning this kid into getting free food and smacking him upside the head periodically, which would have been an interesting end to it if we found out that actually it wasn't Bruce Lee at all. It was just this guy, but no, I think it's an interesting. It's one of those things that it kind of adds to the charm of this film that they went with this technique, that I think in their mind they felt like they needed to do it because they wanted to have a real master training the kid. So that's why they did it. But it's definitely a kind of it's a fascinating idea that the ghost of Bruce Lee is going to train a kid, and that they actually had an actor playing him, because I was thinking maybe they would just show him from the back and never show his face, and we just think that it's going to be Bruce Lee.
Yeah, I did think about, okay, because I mean, I know this guy apparently did some doubling for Bruce Lee in Game of Death. Obviously that's a film that was never completed, so they were just cobbling that together from what had been shot. And I was kind of thinking, would it because you're obviously going to be looking at that person who is playing the ghost of Bruce Lee and comparing him to Bruce Lee. I mean, for me, he didn't really look a lot like Bruce Lee. I mean, you could see some of the way that he spoke and some of his sort of movements and gestures definitely were kind of like influenced by Bruce Lee. Feels like he's sort of bringing that element into his performance. But it kind of, like, does it actually, by showing having an actor do that role, is that really the best way to go? And as you say, would it be better to just have, I don't know, like some a mysterious shadow against a powerful light, and somebody just doing a vocal performance in those moments? Would that work better? I mean, I'm kind. It's sort of hard to. It's kind of hard to know, I think. And I think these scenes, again, just sort of picking up on something we've mentioned a few times already. There's clearly a lot of respect, as there should be, for Bruce Lee, and these scenes are sort of treated very, very seriously. But as we've discussed before, like, some of these other scenes are just so wacky, that you just you just go from this sort of training montage in the playground, like the handbrake goes on, and now we've got the ghost of Bruce Lee, like, delivering a very serious sermon on the kind of the nature of martial arts to Jason, and you're just like, oh well, hold on, I was really into the goofy bits, and now we're being all serious.
Exactly. Yeah. I think you're right that there's this alchemy going on here with the because of who was involved with making this, that it's a bit of a roller coaster at points. But yeah, I mean, it's almost like as we get stuck into this this montage thing, we're kind of like, okay, Bruce Lee's gone. We're kind of, okay, now where are we going to go from here? And that is when the baddies from the Sherman Oaks dojo scene, they finally make their way to Seattle. They're ready to expand their operation into Seattle, and of all the dojos to pick that they're going to get, it's this famous karate master Ian Riley's dojo. And so we find out, of course, during the party that he tells them that we're going to take over your dojo. You don't have any choice. We're going to use this. We're going to take it or whatever. And so Ian Riley offers a compromise, which is interesting, right? Because I don't understand, if these guys can just take these things by force, why do they need to compromise? But he says, all right, why don't we have a karate off in our this gym here, and whoever wins the karate off gets my dojo. And the baddies think this is a fantastic idea, which doesn't make any sense at all. They're putting flyers up, they're getting TV advertisements, they're getting it posted on the news that everybody, hey, come to this dojo and check out this thing. I feel like, again, from a crime syndicate standpoint, the last thing I want is, because I mean, I could just imagine, I'm sure at this point there's wiretaps, if this is a major crime family in New York, that, the FBI is onto them at this point, and they're seeing this and they're probably thinking, this is fantastic. Like, we've got tons of like evidence that the movie probably should have ended with a huge FBI raid, but that's, neither here nor there. The fight is being publicized, and so this is kind of where we kind of get into our end scene. But before that, we do have a quick sort of, as you mentioned, we have a reconciliation between Jason and his father, because Jason's father is accosted by some bar toughs outside the bar he's working at. And Jason actually has to go in and rescue him. They aren't, like you said, they aren't kind of fighting together and the dad getting his mojo back. No, Jason just wins for him.
Yeah, and it's a bit of it's an anticlimax, and you're sort of left wondering sort of what exactly is are we meant to conclude from that particular scene. But as you mentioned, we're soon into this absurd tournament where well, I mean, why on earth would any crime syndicate agree to this bizarre compromise deal where they'll just just shoot you in the head and take the keys from your pocket and we now run this dojo. I mean, they're not going to mess around with a tournament like that. But I think we're through the looking glass by that point in the film.
Yes, and so where the reconciliation is important is because Jason is attending this tournament with his dad and RJ. So the dad is there for this, and so the tournament is set up where these guys from New York, the crime guys, they have their three best fighters, and then of course we have the three guys from the gym. So we have the karate champion Ian Riley, we've got Dale Jacoby, and then we have the guy who represented the dojo in beating up Jason initially, who was I guess he's like the West Coast karate champion or something. I don't know what his deal was. But these three are going to take on the New York's three best until we get a plot twist. And the baddies let us know that no, actually, our 3 guys are going to bow out, and we're just going to bring in Jean-Claude Van Damme, and he's going to take all 3 of your guys. Which I was hoping it was going to be like him fighting all 3 at once, but that's not how it works. He's fighting those 3, and so the moment Jason sees that it's Van Damme, he warns them. He says, like, listen, guys, you don't really want to deal with him. He's the real deal. And of course, why would they listen to him? They don't care what he thinks. And he's like, okay, well, good luck. And of course, Van Damme dispatches of the first 2 immediately. And then the third fight happens with the karate champion Ian Riley, and it devolves into this huge, like, and the best way I could describe it was, if Popeye and Bluto were having a boxing match in a cartoon, right? Bluto would be doing all these things, like tying him into the ropes and pounding him and all this kind of crazy stuff. And it devolves into that where Van Damme has, like, tied the guy. He's, like, choking him with a cord from around the turnbuckle. He's tying him within the ropes and pounding him that way. And this is where your article comes in to explain what is happening here. In fact, the star, or the karate champion played by Ron Poehler, is it, or
Panel?
Ron
Pohnel.
Yeah, Pohnel. Yeah, he says 11th hour that he doesn't want to lose a fight. He's not interested in losing to Van Damme. And which I have to assume is an issue. An issue with these movies, that these competitive martial artists don't want to be the one to lose a fight. I know that was a big thing. I think in was a movie that Chuck Norris did with David Carradine, where Carradine didn't want to lose to him. Steven Seagal never wants to lose in his movies.
Oh, probably, right? That must be Lone Wolf. That must be Lone Wolf McQuade.
That's right. Yeah, exactly. So it's a kind of a common thing, but of course they're stuck. And what's interesting is in the way that they wrote it is they're like, oh well, he knew he had us over a barrel because we had developed him to such a point that he had to do this. That's not really true at all, right?
No, yeah.
I mean, he wasn't that developed, and he easily could have twisted an ankle or something, and Jason comes in and wins the fight. They didn't need to kind of. They didn't need to bow to his pressure if they didn't want to. The fact that they thought that he had them over a barrel was really interesting in reading that. So just to kind of give everybody an idea, when this guy comes in and says, "Listen, I'm not losing this fight," they say, "Oh well, we've already filmed so many scenes with him, we can't possibly." He's got us stuck here, so we've got to figure something out. And that's when they come up with this idea that Van Damme cheats, and that's how he beats the guy.
Yeah, and and I think it kind of, I don't think when you're watching the film, you don't really notice that, that seems like oh, maybe that was always in the script. I mean, who knows? It doesn't really make an ultimate difference to the film or to any character's particular arc or anything like that. But I mean, this part of the film, it's kind of where you get the most fight action and the kind of like the most sustained fight action. And I mean, I don't know what you thought about the kind of the martial arts, the fight scenes that we get in this film. I mean, I didn't think they personally, I didn't think they were that great. I mean, I'm certainly not saying that they were bad, but I didn't think that they were terribly special. And I think one of the things that sort of in the sort of research that I was sort of reading about was that a lot of the, as you mentioned, a lot of the actors in here were like first time actors, and they were picked because they knew martial arts, but because they'd never acted and done martial arts films before, they didn't know like screen fighting, so they didn't know how to like throw kicks and throw punches in a way that look real on a camera but don't actually take somebody's head off. So you then have like Corey Yuen sort of trying to then explain to these guys, obviously he doesn't speak English, he's then trying to explain to these guys like how you do screen fighting, and so I wonder if some of the sort of choreography and some of the fight scenes are a bit compromised by the fact that you've got all these very inexperienced actors, and a guy who doesn't speak English, and that then is influencing it, because obviously, I mean, Corey Yuen's, probably, is probably bows to no man in terms of like the action that he's put on screen over the years. But I looking at this, it's certainly, I would say far from his finest hour. But yeah, I don't know what your take on that sort of side of things is, Matt.
Yeah, it feels almost like because these guys didn't necessarily know a lot of what they were doing, it felt like they were doing a lot of like dodging, right? It was a lot of like, dodging kicks. Whereas I think, the martial artists who are used to working in films, they know, because yeah, I would imagine if you're fighting in a karate, if you're actually in a one-on-one battle with someone in karate, blocking is probably not something that's a huge deal, right? You want to be on the offense and you want to get someone right away, probably. Whereas in a film, it's a lot of blocking, right? It's a lot of like people throwing kicks and people, and it's a lot of timing with that too as well. And yeah, I imagine if they're not good at that piece of it, with fights being choreographed, it's hard to kind of figure out what to do there. Yeah, a lot of it was edited too. A lot of it was like, showing a kick here or there, like, and then hitting somebody. It was, yeah, and they said that was where they did the most filming, was in these scenes, and so I think part of that was probably UN wanting to get it right and just having trouble with it.
Yeah, I mean it's a good. It provides a good climax to the film, and I don't want anyone coming away thinking that sort of a terrible sequence in the film. But yeah, it just for me, I wasn't too impressed by the kind of the martial arts actions that we get in the film. But as a kind of climax to the movie, it's very satisfying and kind of sort of makes the film end on just the sort of notes that you want, I think, at this particular moment.
Yeah, and I think one of the things too that was interesting about the Van Damme cheating part when he's fighting Ian Riley, the karate champion. To this point, I don't know how you felt when Van Damme was fighting the guys from that other dojo, but I didn't like those guys, and I was kind of happy to see Van Damme taking them out, which was, again, probably, a hole in the script, that they didn't write it properly, that they have two sets of baddies in a sense, and when you're seeing these two baddies square off, Van Damme was the cooler of the group, so yeah. There's also probably a sense, too, for Dale Jacoby that later on he must be thinking like, oh, I got to fight Van Damme,
well, there's a couple of things we should sort of mention, I think, which is that obviously this is Van Damme's kind of first real proper screen role, and in this climactic fight he does do one of his trademark splits across the ropes in the ring. So we get to see one of his actor trademarks in his breakout role, which a move obviously we will see and enjoy many more times in the years ahead.
Yes, yeah, exactly. That's a good point. It's almost like
announcing himself to the world, wasn't he? With those.
Yes. Yeah, I mean, there really is. One of the things I think they talk about here, and maybe what I'll do, I'll kind of wrap us up. But what essentially happens is that in sort of cheating, Jason jumps in and says, kind of just tries to jump in to save Ian while he's being beaten by Van Damme, who's cheating, and then of course they have the fight, and Jason prevails, and everybody goes away happy. Everybody's lifting Jason up in the air, and all that stuff happens. Is really great. But one of the things I think that article that you sent mentioned was that there's sort of a sense that Van Damme has a bit of ego, and I kind of feel like if I'm Van Damme and I watch this movie beginning to end, that I feel like I was the star of this movie, that like I'm, I can kind of get where the ego comes from here, that like, if I was him watching this, I'd be like, man, I was kind of head and shoulders better than everybody in here. Because it kind of feels like that. And maybe it's just because I know who Van Damme is after, and he's the face and everything that I key in on. But there was almost a sense that he was the one who really had the it factor in this film.
I agree. And I disagree with that, because I definitely think you are projecting onto this film and that performance the fact that we know what happens, within a few years he's making, Bloodsport and Kickboxer, and, then we're into Universal Soldier. So I think there's definitely an element of like projecting what we know about Van Damme's kind of future onto this performance. But by the same token, I do think that he kind of like pops out of the screen in a way which the other actors don't do, and the other performers don't do. So, in terms of the martial arts that he puts out there on the screens, I think, he definitely looks like the strongest performer there. And I think even at this stage, like in terms of the performance that he's delivering. I mean, it's not Shakespearean, it's not Hamlet acting that he's putting out here, but he's definitely got a screen presence and a charisma that does pop out of the screen. So you can see that sort of star quality within the little, frankly, that we get of Van Damme within this film.
Yeah, I guess we've kind of hit the end here on this. Any final thoughts on No Retreat, No Surrender?
I think we did. One thing we haven't mentioned is the bizarre breakdancing section of this film, where we get to go to a nightclub with RJ. Everybody there seems to be sort of dressed up in outfits inspired by Michael Jackson, and we get a breakdancing scene, which I've no idea what relevance that had to the plot or how it advanced the story, which I just thought, it just was a real sort of nod to the pop culture of the time. And I think that's something overall which I think you can say about No Retreat, No Surrender, which is this is a film very much of its time. The style, the fashion, the look, the tone, it's an absolute time capsule of that year. You couldn't make it the year before, you probably couldn't make it the year afterwards. It is that year in a nutshell.
Yeah, it actually, you make a great point too about the breakdancing thing, because RJ seems to be very popular at this club, and the whole film kind of sets up that RJ doesn't really have a lot of friends, that he's just he's befriended Jason, that he's being picked on by this gang of like more popular kids. He doesn't get invited to Kelly's party. Yet here he has this environment where he's like the most popular person there, and it's weird that they weren't leaning on that more. Like, instead of like worrying about these bullies, like why not just be, in this friend group here where you're the most popular? And Kelly was at this club and she seemed to enjoy being there. So yeah, it was interesting. But like you said, yes, it was very much they kind of pulled that directly from films like Breakin', which was really great to see.
Definitely.
Excellent. Well, as we're wrapping up here, Will, did you want to do some plugs of some of your things?
Oh, you're too kind, Matt. You're too kind. But yes, so I run Exploding Helicopter, which is a website and podcast dedicated to celebrating films where helicopters explode. It's our favorite on-screen fiery film trope. So yeah, if you want to come and find out about the strange way helicopters keep exploding in films, then you can find our website at explodinghelicopter.com, or you can check out our podcast, which you can find on sort of pretty much every podcatcher that is out there. At the time of this recording, our most recent episode is looking at a very strange romantic dance musical called Dancing Is On, and Matt himself is my guest on that particular show as we discuss that very strange movie. But yeah, come follow us on Twitter, Facebook. We're on all the sort of social media. So yeah, come and check us out. Come and say hello.
Yes, yeah, for sure. And I definitely, your Twitter in particular for people. I mean, the podcast is fantastic and the site is fantastic, but also people that should be following your Twitter, because you kind of post GIFs and videos of great exploding helicopters in movies, and some really fantastic ones that are. It's always kind of a nice, fun thing to kind of, as you're going through your timeline, to see a great exploding helicopter in a movie.
Well, if you've got time to kill in your life, our Twitter feed's a great way to waste it. So yeah, come and follow us on Twitter at ChopperFireball.
All right, excellent. Well, thank you again, Will, for coming on. I think this is out of the 3 times you've been on the show, this is the first time you've been in a film that didn't have an exploding helicopter in it. So we kind of went a little bit off the usual fare. In your case,
it's good to stretch my filmic muscles.
Yes, we might. Well, I mean, who knows? Maybe there's another possibility for playground montage training scene movie, because that does also seem to be a bit of an 80s thing that happened quite a bit. That there are a lot of movies where people were training in
public parks.
Right, exactly. Yes, for sure. All right, excellent. Well, thank you again, Will, for coming on. Thank you, everybody, for listening. This is the Direct-to-Video Connoisseur Podcast, and we'll be back soon, hopefully in the near future. All right, thanks, everyone.
Hear that? That's the sound of a patient whose health data is protected from a cyber attack. And that's the sound of a financial system that's digitally secured from bad actors. Right now, there's an invisible war being fought on a digital battlefield that impacts what we do every day. That's why at Peraton, we do the can't be done to help protect the vital systems we rely on. Because if we don't, the alternative is unimaginable. Peraton.